I'll stop and watch for those as time goes on. Just waiting for confirmation here on YouTube. We are on YouTube Live. Thanks everyone for joining me for this webinar. Just going to check my audio. There we go. Okay, so everything looks good on YouTube. Welcome to the Friday webinar everyone, and thanks for waiting for me here for the last couple of weeks as I recovered and tried to take care of a few other things. And we were going to originally schedule this webinar for October 3rd, and I decided to postpone it just to increase the value and also to give me a bit more time to prepare properly. But I'm more than excited to bring this grade 6 book to you with all of the music. Next Friday we're going to listen to the classical music. I'll play through all the classical pieces. I believe there are 9 of them. And this morning I'm going to read through the Baroque pieces, and we'll geek out for a little bit on Baroque performance practice, how it relates to the piano. I'll try and demonstrate a little bit with the harpsichord sound as well. I'm using my digital piano today, and so feel free to tell me in the comments on YouTube or in the chat or in the Zoom room here how it's sounding. I'm hoping it sounds a little bit better and a little bit clearer, especially with all the detail that we're getting at this level in the Baroque music. And I may decide to continue to use the digital because I find it works quite well for the sound, and hopefully on YouTube it renders a little better than it was previously too. So we're talking about Mosaic 6 today. Here it is here. Coil binding from grade 5 up. I don't know if I got a chance to mention that in the spring, but I think I did at my last webinar. So you're going to see the coil bindings from grade 5, 6, 7, 8. The grade 7 book is starting to land in my, on my computer now for editing. And so I think it's going to take at least a good 2 weeks to edit that, and give us another 4 weeks, I think, before the grade 7 book is ready. So middle of November would be the updated projection. I have no projection for grade 8. That's just going to be a monster project that we hope to finish by the end of the academic year, and we hope to have that ready for the spring so that you can see that. And I'm excited to bring all that music to you. It's going to be great in the coming weeks here. So anyway, grade 6 today. The coil binding, one thing when I'm on the digital piano, the stand is so short. Sometimes this coil binding will sag backwards. So I have a couple of books behind here. Maybe I'll just show you for a second. When I was at the APTA conference in Calgary, the Alberta Piano Teachers Association, the best-selling book was one of Brock Chart's books, not this particular one. But I believe Andrew has, at Harvard Wanless, has this book here, the Pop Book 1 by Brock Chart, up for sale on that website now, in addition to one of the jazz books. This is really good stuff, really hot seller. I'm hoping to bring Brock back probably next month. I'm going to reach out to him shortly and then let him update you. I got an email from him last night because I subscribed to his Melodies Monthly, and every month you get 4 brand new pieces. It is really kind of neat. It's like Christmas 12 times a year for piano teachers in terms of getting new repertoire that you can use with the students. So that's one thing that's backing up my book today. And then the other thing is this Little Gems for Piano. I picked this up back in March at MTNA conference in Minneapolis by Paula Dreher. Paula Dreher is an American pianist who studied in Canada, studied at McGill, and what she's created are a couple of volumes here of rote pieces with teacher duets. I just love these. I've been using them since last spring with my students, and that's something else I hope to bring her on at some point as well to present to us and give you a little idea about rote teaching, and that's become a bigger part of my studio lately. So I just thought I'd mention those 2 things. Let's dive into Mosaic 6 here. We'll talk about Baroque music a fair bit. And like I said, it'll be fun to geek out. I have the scores here. I'm just going to launch that with the screen share so that you can follow along here on the screen as well. And I'll just give you a moment here to find all this and get it set up. I'm starting to get used to the new options on Zoom after the last update. And if I do this, we should be able to see here. I'm just going to back up a little bit here. There's our title page, our credits here, our series editors, music selection committee, etc. About the Mosaics Collection, if you haven't looked, this appears in front of all of the books in the front, inside the front cover. And then table of contents. Here's your music for grade 6. I know a lot of you probably have this book already. Some of you haven't. You're curious to see what's in it. We have here, I believe, 8 Baroque pieces, 9 classical pieces, and then at some point in the near future, in November, I'll play through the group 3 selections, which is modern and romantic. And I may try to do that all in one sitting, because that's a little less detailed. I won't talk in between so much about those pieces. But wonderful music. I'm excited to bring the whole book to you, especially that group 3, actually. Really great stuff there. 3 groups now. Yeah, someone's in the chat box here. 3 groups. So on a grade 6 exam, this is the first time students are really forced at Conservatory Canada to play a Baroque piece. Up until this point, they could choose Baroque, classical, if they want mix and match those, it didn't matter. Starting in grade 6, we put Baroque in its own group, so students have to, in grade 6, if they do the classical exam, play a Baroque piece. They have to play a classical piece. And then group 3, they have a little bit more selection. You could still have, on a grade 6 exam, out of the 5 pieces, you could have 3 of them in a contemporary nature, between the own choice and the 2 group 3 selections that they get. Okay, lots of Canadian composers too. Yeah, I know that comment is well noted there. Okay, so the first piece up here, Elisabetta de Gambarini, whom we're featuring a lot in this series. We're trying to unearth new music by women composers and by other composers that just may be sitting there. And of course, we figure, or Elisabetta de Gambarini and also Elizabeth Turner, we're going to see later on in group 1 here, figure quite heavily in the music that we've featured so far up to grade 6. And so originally a harpsichord piece and a jig. We have a couple of jigs in group 1 here, and a couple of bourrées, which is kind of interesting. Lots of exciting tunes for students, a little more upbeat, and we think the students will really like these. What I like about this one is the lines are quite linear. They rise and fall a little more gently. There are still some leaps here and there. We get a predictable left-hand continual line. We'll talk about what that means in a little bit. I'm just going to jump right in here, play through the jig, let you hear what it sounds like, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the features. And again, if the audio isn't sounding good, someone please let me know in the chat box. Trips along in 12/8 time, which we typically want, that triple compound meter in a jig that we would normally hear. So it's very much like the other jigs we would hear in the Baroque period. But again, I'm just noticing that the lines here, even though there are some leaps, there's a lot of linear movement, which is really nice. It allows that right hand to just sort of play a little more legato perhaps than we normally would with a jig or with a Baroque piece in general at the keyboard at this level. The left hand isn't too obtrusive, yet it's accompanying properly here in a counterpoint style, and so I'm detaching a lot of the left hand like we would expect. And we talked about some of these things before in previous webinars, but I want to review them again today. Oh, sorry, I'm going to get that volume up. Thanks for that in the chat box there. That's where I'm going to forget to do that once in a while. We're going to review all these concepts about Baroque music, and the first one I'll mention is what I might call the anacrusis system. And so rhythmically, there's always, not always, but there's usually, and often even if there wasn't, an implied anacrusis at the start of phrases. And you can see here, the jig always begins on an upbeat. Da 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 da, ba ba da 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 da. And each subsequent phrase starts on that beat 12 of the measure. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to have that up down, because we always want the downbeat to be stronger. So it's something we're listening for on exams and something we want to be aware of in the music. The left hand, this is emulating a cello perhaps of a continuo group. If you get a Baroque ensemble, you've got a continuo group which consists of the harpsichord player and a cello, maybe harpsichord and bass. And in the harpsichordist's left hand and the bass instrument are playing identical notes, while the harpsichord's right hand is improvising. This here in the treble clef, though, in this piece would be emulating a solo instrument like a Baroque flute or something like that, or a violin playing the right hand. So our left hand is thinking as a continuo, and we're wondering how would that bass instrument, this is the cello or the double bass back then, how would they articulate? And so we've talked before about notes that are closer together can be slurred, notes that are further apart can be detached or more staccato, and then notes that are longer may be detached from each other. So in fact, in my left hand at the beginning, we get 3 dotted quarters. When I'm playing those, I'm not slurring them together. I'm actually holding for 2 beats of the 3, lifting and rest on the 3rd one. There's always this, not always, but most of the time there's a gap between those notes. And what that did, or what it does on the piano at least, is it allows us to hear the other parts more clearly. We'll talk about this later. I'll play another one of the pieces on the harpsichord later so we can get an idea of what that transparent texture sound sounds like, and then when we bring it over to the piano, how can we adapt it? Our second piece here in Group 1, Toccata in E flat major. This one was lesser known to me. I don't think I had seen it before by the time when we considered putting it in here in the book. By Krebs. We have 2 pieces by Johann Ludwig Krebs. We don't know a lot about Krebs, but we do know that he studied with Bach. And around the same time as Bach, Bach dies in 1750, and by that time, the next generation is already composing in classical style. Krebs is, living with us until 1780, another 30 years, and from what we can tell, still writing in the Baroque tradition and the Baroque style well into that point as well. So well past Bach, but not very famous in his time because the public and everyone else was doing this new thing and discovering sonata form with much more simplified textures, simpler left-hand accompaniments. But here's Krebs still writing in this interesting counterpoint for keyboard, and this is one of those such pieces. So I'll play this without repeats, and Toccata back then, something that's maybe more improvised, something that has an improvisatory feel, lots of fast-moving notes most of the time. Later on, the connotation behind a toccata changes, and we won't talk about that today, but back then, just a name given to something that was to sound improvised, almost like a fantasia, really. So here's this toccata in E flat. Fast-moving patterns there, interesting changes of direction. In the 16th notes, when the notes are further apart, like that opening E-flat major triad, it's going to be a little bit difficult there, I think, for students to play detached. So I'm thinking more legato here through this, with long series of notes, and where I see a change of direction, that's where I might lift. So for example, and this is going to be a bit quiet, or a bit loud, sorry. Lift, and then the new A flat belongs to the next measure, the next phrase. And so that preserves what we call that anacrusis system, even though we're starting on the downbeat here from the outset. Most of these phrases overlap the bar line. You can see that left hand at the end of bar 4. Always detaching those octaves in the left hand. Little things like a couple of bars later in the left hand, I would slur that over the bar line so that I'm preserving the anacrusis system. You can see the left hand in the beginning of the second section after the repeat dots. The left hand gives us the impulse. The right hand begins off the beat and travels to beat 1. That's again part of this anacrusis system. In the third line, you see an interesting design that that's emulated a lot in Baroque music. Those notes that stick out, you've got the E flat and the D that are close together, and then you've got the upper notes. We try to play those louder and separate them a little bit so that within one hand you can get counterpoint. An upper note, 3 lower notes, an upper note, 3 lower notes. And you'll hear harpsichord players, because they couldn't do dynamics that effectively on the harpsichord at all, they used things like time delays to bring out those notes a little bit. It's quite effective. On the piano, we can make the difference with an audible weight adjustment, obviously. And so it's another tool that we use, but we're always looking for things like that. What kind of design is it? How do we highlight the change of direction in the notes, perhaps with a lift, a short lift? And in a piece like this that can go fairly quick, we can feel free to join those 16th notes together. My left hand is much more detached all the way through pretty much, except where there are 16th notes. Tambourine Allegro. This is interesting because to me this sounds a lot like the Krebs piece in its design. A lot of the angles are the same, the running 16th notes are very similar, the texture is the same. And this is by Elizabeth Turner, Baroque composer, probably the first female European composer to be published, we think. We don't know a lot about her life, but like a lot of the women composers back during the Baroque and classical times, they were singers, very famous singers, and Elizabeth Turner was one of those. We're not even sure exactly about her dates. Not a lot has been saved about her, but we have these pieces that are being unearthed, and this is one of them. Interesting juxtaposition here between G major, and then, hey, what does it sound like in G minor? The final line on the page is B flat major, the relative of G minor, and then we do a da capo back to G major for the final 4 bars. I'll play through the whole thing. The only repeat I'll do is the da capo, and I've got a few little ornaments and things I like to add into this one as well. One thing I haven't talked about so much yet, but that is very much a part of Baroque music, is the idea of dynamics. And back then, we didn't do a lot. Dynamics weren't necessarily notated. They were a function of changes in the instrument or changes in the number of players playing. And so in Baroque music, I'm often thinking again of a small Baroque string ensemble, or a Baroque trio, which is actually 4 players by the time you count the 2 continuable players plus the solo instruments. And the idea there being that if it was going to be forte, all 4 players would be playing, and then you would break into a little solo and you'd get a reduction in dynamic. Or let's say Gabrielli's first choral works, or some of his choral works, where he was experimenting with different choirs situated throughout a sanctuary. And if you had all 4 choirs singing, you would get a louder sound. If you only had 1 choir singing, you'd get a smaller sound. Those are the beginnings of kind of dynamics and how they worked. On the harpsichord, it would be by moving stops so that you would get different numbers of plectrums plucking the same string to give you different volumes, and you would have 2 manuals or 2 keyboards set up that you could achieve those dynamics with by changing the register of the sound. On the piano, of course, we can do a lot more than that. We can just do it by transferring weight. And so what I'm thinking in my imagination is, are there more players playing? Are there fewer players playing? Is there an echo effect? I'm starting to think about that in these pieces too. I haven't done a ton of that yet, but you'll hear me pulling out little dynamics through the recording, or at least that's my intention. I don't know whether it's going to translate into the sound on your end, but hopefully it will. So we'll start thinking about, we'll talk about dynamics a little bit. This one I think is an interesting piece in that juxtaposition of G major to G minor. This Bourrée in B minor by Bach is quite familiar to us, I believe. We published it in our last version, or our last edition of the New Millennium Series Piano. It kind of snuck in here, sort of undetected. We weren't going to publish any of the old pieces in the new volume, but this is one of the ones that did sneak in there. B minor, awfully difficult. It's very difficult to play. I find the shapes are interesting. You invariably end up with your thumb on a black key at some point because the F sharp, the dominant, just happens to get in your way often. And so I find fingering quite difficult in this one. But Bach, all sorts of neat ideas in the left hand. He's so advanced in that left hand, the way he's angular, climbing and then changing direction and then letting the left hand fill in whenever the right hand takes a break. So the music's seamlessly kind of staying busy all of the time. And so very difficult to balance between the 2 hands. In general, this is a good piece that shows off in keyboard music the idea that faster notes can be played legato, longer notes can be played more staccato. Thus, we're able to hear both parts more clearly. I'll try and add some dynamics here as well. And bourrées can be quite quick, 2/2 time. Again, there's this anacrusis idea where every phrase begins on an upbeat, ya-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-dum, resting on the downbeat. I'll try and get all that in there, but I'm going to take a cautious tempo today because this piece I find difficult. Bourrée. So again, all sorts of neat angles and designs and gestures in this piece, and we're trying to always highlight and inflect them in some way with direction to the downbeat. And again, just really listening to the left hand. This is one of those pieces I would get students to play a lot by themselves, hand separately with that left hand. Making sure they're really tuned into what that left hand is saying. It's so important. It really is equally as important as the right hand. It should be phrased and inflected in ways that command attention, and that's hard to do on the piano. On the harpsichord, these things just balance out quite nicely. The incisive attack, and again, I'll have an example later. I'll play that, where you can hear everything so clearly. On the piano, we have to make adjustments all the time to make sure we're hearing. But at this level, we really want to hear students. Are they aware of that left hand and the interesting tunes that are down there, and are they able to contribute to the overall design of the music? Just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions here. And then we go into this jig, J-I-G-G, as Time Warp tells us. This one was originally published by Time Warp in the Superscore app, and we're publishing it here in this book. It's a jig by Handel. I hadn't heard of this piece before, but it's a pretty straightforward jig. A little more angular. You see, in terms of articulation, there are some suggestions there. You don't have to follow those, but I think it's really good. Anytime we get these triplets with wide angles, to join the first two, detach the third. You could, in fact, detach all three, but then you lose out on the opportunity to create more texture in the articulation and create more gesture. Gesture is really created, to me, by a combination of slurs and detached articulations. So there's an opportunity here to do quite a bit with it. So I'll play through, you can let me know what you think. Yeah, both hands so busy in that one. It's really hard to keep it straight sometimes. And there's this idea too in Baroque music. The rhythm is quite relentless at times, right? There's nowhere to breathe. You get to the end of something and right away something's beginning in right away. And sometimes I wish I could take a little more breath between those two halves or between the 4-bar ideas. Sonata in A major, Scarlatti. A lot of people feel that Scarlatti fits into the classical period. A lot of people feel that Scarlatti fits nicely into the Baroque period. Really, he is a transition figure. The anacrusis system isn't so well defined here. The left-hand textures are often a little more simplified. But he really captures a culture that we were largely unaware of in this time, and that is the idea of flamenco guitar and how that could relate to the harpsichord. So he grows up in Italy, and it isn't until he moves to Spain after his father dies that he gets absorbed into this idea of keyboard playing, and he writes some 555 of these sonatas, which are simply in binary form. So they're not quite classical yet. And all of them are sort of reflective of different aspects of the culture. And so I hear all sorts of trapeze artists, things tumbling down. He's got a unique way that he uses ornaments and rhythm in the music. But here again, look for a more simplified left-hand texture overall. Here's the second page. I'm going to leave the first page up while I'm playing. But in the right hand, he comes into these neat little decorative 30-second notes on the upbeat sometimes. Again, that's indicative of the anacrusis system a little bit rhythmically, but they're interesting little flicks. It's easy to let these kind of get out of hand, but I try to treat them more as ornaments. I think this one sounds really great on the harpsichord. I'll stick to the piano for now, though, and try and give you a clear idea of what I'm thinking in this one. Lots of fun perpetual motion in that one. Here's a look at the second page. Again, trying to get the leaps going on here. There's a lot of really close movement, a lot of repeated notes in Scarlatti's music that's hard to execute. Sometimes we're advocating for changing fingers on those. I tend not to if I'm feeling sort of athletic and with it. I usually have two fingerings in mind. Today I was able to play that just repeating the same note, which I thought worked more or less well for me today. And then where there are these wide leaps, we tend to take a bit more time perhaps to land there and give the effect of a gesture where you're leaping and landing before tumbling back down again. Scarlatti is a way of giving this wonderful tumbling ideas where you land to the ground and you feel gravity really taking over. So a lot of fun to play, and I think students will really like this one. You can see too in our editions here, wherever there's a hole, sometimes we put these interesting quotes that Andrew and his team have found. To send light into the darkness of men's hearts, such is the duty of the artist. That's Robert Schumann. Okay, so this one by Zipoli. Zipoli we know a fair bit about. I think he, an Italian keyboard player who ended up in South America after a while and wrote in both styles, and very much like Scarlatti in some ways had this Latin influence in his music later on in life. This piece, it's almost set up like a mini fugue where you can see a subject or this motive or this idea, whatever you want to call it, reflected in the left hand, and then it pops up in different places here and there. This is one of those ones I think can get really muddy quite quickly because of all the detail there, and it's easy to lose the idea of the counterpoint in the two parts and keep it straight on the piano for the listener. And so what I'll do on this one, I'm going to play it through 3 times. First time, I'm going to play it on harpsichord, just so we can get a better idea of how it may have been conceived, where all the detail just sort of pops out at us quite nicely, and you can hear both parts clearly. And then I'll do a muddy version on the piano where I'm not balancing my hands, and then I'll do a third version where I try to balance my hands to bring out one voice over the other, so we start to hear some of that detail again because of the compromise that the piano presents. So first time through, I'm going to play it on a harpsichord here, just a regular sort of French harpsichord. I'm fooling around a little bit there, but it's just so fun on harpsichord to decorate little things. Okay, and here's the next version on piano unbalanced. version, I'm going to be more cognizant now of trying to bring out one idea or the other to try and highlight and overcome that muddiness of the piano in the middle register when the notes are so close together. So that's what we're looking for there. Feel free to share your comments in the chat box of what you thought of the 3 different versions, and could you actually hear a difference in the third one, where I'm trying to have a chauvinism for one part or the other. Otherwise, and I don't know if you could hear in the second version, go back and listen again, perhaps on the replay, see how muddy did it get. I was trying not to be really aware of the different parts, and of course we're wanting to hear the third one. The harpsichord gives us a great model. I know I've had a couple of opportunities to own harpsichords, or at least house them here in my studio. And I've always turned it down because I know it would be sort of disappointing. Nice to have a harpsichord when it's sitting there doing well, but every few days, and I mean professional harpsichordists will tell you, for every hour or 2 that you put into the instrument, you have to spend an additional hour maintaining to make sure keys don't stick. The mechanisms are quite primitive to make sure plectrums are plucking, and parts are constantly getting worn out, not to mention the tuning. I just love the fact that I can play it on this digital piano, and I have a couple of harpsichords to choose from, and I think they sound really great. Not a substitute really for that live instrument, but the amount of pain that you would undergo these days with a live harpsichord, and those that use them and try to maintain them will tell you, you really have to be prepared to put the work in. And the harpsichords I was in a position to acquire, if I'd only just said yes, were ones that required hours and hours of work to get them back into playing condition. So that's just how how far the piano's come in terms of how that can work. Third version was clear, I would say. It's cool. Okay. So we're coming to the end. We only have a couple pieces left. Bourrée in A minor, another one by Krebs. This one's perhaps a bit familiar to some of us, and it's been published before in other albums. I think it's really neat, though. It's a great idea, or it shows us the anacrusis system really clearly, where you get this beat 4 and 1, 4 and 1, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, always moving to the downbeat. So students will probably want to thump that upbeat, so it's really tricky to get that at the beginning so that it feels like an up, up, down all the way through. I'll try and highlight some dynamics in this one as well, in a Baroque fashion. And so this is one of the few pieces here that we've actually added some dynamics to, because we had an indication in the original score. But again, you don't have to actually follow. If you looked at several originals or attempted text editions, you would see that the dynamics would probably be placed in different places depending on the publication. They were interchangeable at this time. The idea of dynamics, was existing for different reasons in the Baroque period. We didn't really have the piano yet in its modern form. And so feel free to choose and mix and match, edit those dynamics to make sense for what interpretation you or the students want to create. Our examiners are trained to listen for that, not to hold you to the exact edition. It's another question that keeps coming up too now, I'm noticing. People are commenting that they're seeing in our latest editions where we do have a piece that was previously published in another way, namely the Clementi sonatinas, that if we had to do it the new way, and the answer is no, pick whatever edition you want. We're not so fussy about that. Our examiners are not listening. They're listening for detail, but they're not listening for detail as a determinant so much of the final mark. As long as it sounds well informed, that's what gets those marks up into the 90s. So if a student is playing a note that is in one edition but not in the other one, we're not really concerned about that at all. It's more the bigger effect, our students creating gestures, that kind of thing. So know that you have the license to play these in different ways, and we certainly don't hold you to the dynamics on the score here. Let's see. Okay, question in the chat box. Would you be allowed to take that much time going into count 1 since it's a dance? Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea there is on the harpsichord would probably take even more time. On the piano, it's important to take time. And actually, this reminds me of something else when it comes to string playing. I have on my list here to mention. It's probably the most important thing. When we're thinking about articulation and time, we think about not so much the harpsichord, which I demonstrated a bit earlier, but more about Baroque string players. And we've talked about this a little bit before. The bow did not have a linear shape with those horsehair. It wasn't gut strings, it was horsehair string. Sorry, it was made out of horsehair, it wasn't a synthetic string. And the modern violin has a flat bow, so you can get tension right through the whole stroke of the bow. I'm not a string player, so I'm just giving you my take on this. The bow is convex so that they can come off and change direction often with notes, and you hear a little space at the end more easily. Everything would sound more lifted. And so when they're also looking at the design of the strings, whether it's on the violin or the cello or the viola, they're not just 4 flat strings. They're arranged in a quadrilateral kind of pattern so that you had to change your arm angle and cross over those strings. It would take time to get there. So I'm trying to also emulate, if these notes are up high, by the time I lift off and come back down, there's a little bit of a fraction of the time that takes place there, even in a dance. And so if you listen to Baroque orchestras play on authentic instruments, you get a really good idea of that breath and time that can take place. And so the idea of the dance is, it's a stylized idea. We're creating the idea of a bourrée, which can even go faster than I played it there if we wanted to. I'm just trying to be a bit cautious today. But we can still take a little bit of time because we're a solo instrument. So we don't have to be exactly metronomic. And that's another one of the things I was going to mention too. This idea of flexibility and pulse. We don't employ outright rubato in Baroque music as we would in the Romantic period. Yet we're not as strict as we are in classical period music. We can be flexible with the pulse and the movement that takes place in pushing through phrases and little bits of time in between phrases. It was part of the style back then because they didn't have dynamics the same way that we have them nowadays. So those are some things that are definitely allowable. Be free, be expressive. It was an extravagant period. It was a flamboyant period. If you look at the design, how ornate all the architecture is back then, the visual arts, everything gets cleaned up in the classical period, much leaner lines, very balanced and orderly. But we want to imitate that in the music, so I'm always encouraging students to be as descriptive as possible with their sound and the use of time. What is the reason for not writing out suggestions for the ornaments? In some editions you'll see that. You'll see where there are explanations or explications of the ornaments. We keep them pretty simple. I think, for example, in this piece there really aren't any ornaments. If we look at some of the other ones, we don't have a lot of complicated ornaments. And if they get complicated, we would write them out. Now, we've done some webinars on ornamentation if anyone has any questions about them. But you can just see how much fits on a page here. In this particular page, we don't really have room for a footnote, let's say, in a lot of cases. So I think it was helpful to do that for a time, but when you start looking at in other editions of Conservatory albums, the explanations are all very simple and straightforward. If it's a mordant trill with a slash through it, the note starts on the note that you've seen, you go down and back up. It's a 3-note trill. Everything else with a trillo, or what we used to call maybe an upper mordant, just the trill sign, is usually a 4-note trill starting on the note above. And sometimes if the note above precedes it, you don't have to start on the note above. Some people say you do, some people say you don't. And then if there's time, you can do a longer trill and shake back and forth. But these trills are unmeasured. Generally in Baroque music, you shouldn't be measuring them accurately. They're just happening as decorations that fit into the line. And so we want people to be expressive about that. I think with the modern sort of performance practice information that's out there, It's more of an oral thing rather than here's how you do it. And so it's not hard to find those explanations nowadays, and that's why we didn't bother getting into the publishing of exactly what these ornaments look like. We want people to be free to interpret them in different ways. And there's plenty of situations where I'll see a note, a notation about how it ought to be rendered, and I find myself doing it differently. That's one of the other reasons we decided to shy away from publishing an explanation for those ornaments throughout. And we'll have more topics. We'll have more discussions on ornamentation over time to make that clear. Is that it? That's the last piece. We're already at the end here. The romance here, this is by Hummel. I'll just give you a quick look at what we're going to look at next Friday in terms of the classical music. This is a nice slower movement here. Diabelli Sonatina in F. I think a lot of us are familiar with that one. Franz Joseph Haydn, Sonata in G major. This one's probably familiar too to a lot of us. James Hook. Matthew Kamich, this one perhaps a little less familiar. Really interesting piece. And Cimarosa, also interesting, something I had never heard before. Muzio Clementi, we republished this one, Sonatina in C from Opus 36, number 3. It was in the previous New Millennium series, but this is the one from his 6th edition, his final edition. It rarely gets published, and so there's some interesting twists and turns in there that I'll highlight for us next week. C major by Kulau. A lot of these are pretty familiar, actually. I think too, maybe not so much this Dussek movement, this rondo. It's kind of interesting and really emulative of Dussek's chamber writing for piano. So those are the ones there that we're going to go through together next week in the classical period. Anybody have any other questions here that's in the Zoom room with me about Baroque style? I had a bunch of things I wanted to talk about today. Talk about the instruments and how they were used, about the articulation, about the use of rhythm, about ornaments a little bit. We talked about the harpsichord and how to balance the texture and balance different parts, how to make some of the decisions around the articulation. We've talked about a lot of that in the past. We've talked about dynamics. The idea of terraced dynamics is okay, but the idea of crescendo and diminuendo is also okay nowadays. Most people agree that that was part of Baroque music to get gesture out of the music as well. And certainly when we play it on the piano, everything needs to have some kind of gesture, otherwise we sound like jackhammers, right? And so that's one thing we're always trying to get across to our students. How do we get into that, and how do we get into the idea of gesture and tapering and inflecting everything, especially when the music is so florid and rich in design as it is in the Baroque period. We've also talked about flexible pulse, taking time to breathe through the music, I think is really important. And hopefully my performances give us a little idea of how this music sounds. Hopefully you like it. And I think what we'll do there is we're going to take a look at, or I'm going to stop the YouTube stream, and then those of you here with me in the Zoom room, we can continue chatting for a little bit. And I see a couple of other questions coming up. So those of you on YouTube, thanks for watching the replay here. Thanks for being with us. And be sure to check a week from now when we get into the classical period. And you can order the Mosaics books from the Harbridge Wanless website. From their web store, you can also order it from Long and McQuaid stores. A lot of those stores have them stocked. If you know of an independent retailer in your community, have them reach out to Harbridge Wanless to set up an account, and they can order books from them. Also NYC teachers, if you know, these books are also sold through NYC, and if you want to go that route as well with your other NYC books, by all means, many places to get these books, all available in Canada now, and hopefully you're finding them attractive. We're starting to get more feedback, and happy that a lot of you seem to be liking the music and liking